aloha ho mai kako o wau no imi kalili ho'omaua na wau I ka ho'oloka'i I ke Wala'au ana nui o ka waiwai o keia la. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Amy Kalili. I'm going to continue on as your moderator today for our first day of the Hilo field experience. And we are so grateful to have another set of panelists joining us at this time for our second panel. So I'm just going to ask all of them to jump on, turn on their cameras and their microphones as well. Aloha kako, eka ohana.
Aloha.
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 Hi, aloha. So for our participants and our audience, the title of our second panel is Native Language in the Home, Overcoming Internal Residual Barriers of Colonialism. And we have some amazing makua, and similar to our first panel, they're parents in the program, but everybody wears a bunch of different hats in the work that's being done in the Hawaiian language movement. And so we'll get into some really brief background on our individual panelists, but in general, just kind of some background on what we're looking at in terms of the next 30, 40 minutes that we're going to share together, which is acknowledging the fact that in increasing numbers, parents are reestablishing or establishing, if you will, the Hawaiian language as the language in the home. And many are choosing as a means to accomplishing that, choosing to enroll their keiki or their children in the Hawaiian medium education program, whether that's starting in the Punana Leo preschools and or in through the various K-12 Hawaiian immersion and Hawaiian medium schools throughout the state of Hawaii that fall under the State Department of Education. That's a critical way that our ohana are working together to bring the Hawaiian language, the ʻŌlelo Hawaii, back into their homes. And after 40 years of the program's existence, similar to what we were talking about in the first panel, there are still numerous barriers that families have to overcome. And a good portion of those barriers are, again, the results of past acts of injustice and the effects of which are still with us today. And so joining us today are a group of really steadfast parents who, again, wear many hats and carry various koleana or responsibilities in our community. They represent, I think, a great spectrum of the various points that our ohana happen to be on in their own learning journey and in the process of bringing ʻŌlelo Hawaii back into the home, whether that's a context where both mom and dad and all of the keiki or the children in the household speak Hawaiian. And so Hawaiian really is the dominant language that's used in the home. We have parents from homes where you have one parent who is fluent in Hawaiian and the other isn't, but is learning alongside as they engage in the program. And then we have parents who, both of them, they themselves are learning alongside with their children, which is something that Akekala, I think, pointed out in the first panel. And so all of these panelists that are here with us today kind of represent that spectrum, and we'll get into their own individual experiences. But by way of some quick introductions, we are fortunate to have Anela Freitas with us. Aloha kaʻaue, Anela.
Aloha.
So glad to have you here. Anela is one of those ohana who both of the family environment is rich in ʻŌlelo Hawaii. He and his wife have been Punana Leo parents and are now Nawahi parents. And we're going to ask Anela to speak about, their personal experience and kind of a transition that they've made recently to the place where they are residing, the school that the keiki are going to, and kind of a new role that Anela, I've heard, has taken on recently with a couple of his keiki. But for now, mahalo nui, Anela, for joining us. We also have Miss Keholani Aipia Peters, another parent whose children have come up through the Punana Leo and Nawahi as well. Kehau is a kumu at Nawahi Okalani Opu'u. She's also the president of the local charter school board. And we look forward to kind of picking Kehau's brain as well and gaining some insight from her. Aloha, Kehau.
Aloha kaua.
And then we are fortunate to have the beautiful Kahele Ohana joining us this morning. Kai and Maria, first of all, again, are parents themselves of beautiful keiki who came up through the Punana Leo. They have two daughters who are currently at Nawahi o Kalani Opu'u, and they themselves, are on a learning journey, if you will, and will be able to share with us some of that insight. we're also going to take advantage, even though, you know, kind of the last panel, we talked about some advocacy things. We're going to take advantage of having Kai Kahele with us and pose some questions to him about advocacy, as Kai is a former state of Hawaii senator, as well as a former United States congressman. And so we are going to take the opportunity, if you will, Kai, to ask you some questions along those lines. But aloha ya olua e Kai me Maria.
Mahalo. Thanks for having us, Amy.
Absolutely. You know, actually, maybe I'll start with Maria. I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Maria, with my first question. And although I'll pose the questions to a particular panelist, if any of you have additional thoughts to share along that same line of questioning, please feel free to chime in, just jump in or raise your hand or whatever, give a holla. But Maria, you know, I wanted to start with you and just acknowledge that sometimes the lingering effects of colonization, if you will, manifests via doubt in our own community, our own local community, even our own Native Hawaiian community sometimes, as to the value of this approach to education. And sometimes our own ohana, I think, question, okay, why? Why are we doing this? Why are we choosing to put our keiki into this program? And I'm just wondering if maybe from any, you know, personal experience that you and Kai may have had about when you made that decision as a family to put the girls into Hi'ipepe at the time and Punana Leo, did you have any experience like that? And whether it's sharing what that experience was, you know, explaining to Ohana, kind of how you've addressed that and continue to address that over the years.
Oh, it's for you, Maria.
Hi, Amy, sorry, I'm zooming in from Sydney, Australia, and I think my internet is a little spotty. I apologize.
Did you get the question though?
I think so. So when, yeah, our journey into Punana Leo, when we first started, I had just moved to Hilo from Oahu. My ethnicity is Filipina Haole, and I was raised in Hawaii, but not necessarily within the Hawaiian culture movement or in anything other than a regular local girl growing up in Hawaii. When I moved with Kai to Hilo, where he is from, he tells me that he thinks our kids should go to Punana Leo, Hi'ipepe program. And I was like, okay, what do we got to do for this? And it was an incredible opportunity at the time, because up until the point when we put our now 9-year-old daughter at the Punana Leo, the Hi'ipepe program, they were only accepting keiki from the kumu who were there, which was a need for them, but they had opened it up to like non-speaking families. And we were extremely fortunate to be able to have our daughter go to the Hi'ipepe program at 1.5 years. So that really got us started at the very, very beginning. And for me, having no ʻŌlelo background, I was able to start at the beginning at a 1.5-year-old's level and to progress all the way through. But when I first started talking to my family and my friends about going into the Hi'ipepe program, some of the questions that they asked or some of the comments that they made were like, what are they going to do with this type of education? What are they going to do with a language that is not a common language throughout the world? How are they going to be the kind of child that can be a global citizen with a language that is dead to the world? So I didn't know those answers. I know them now after 9 years of being through Hi'ipepe, Punana Leo, to Keiki, now Navahi. Our 9-year-old is in the Papa Ekolu, the 3rd grade. And I know all of the answers to those questions, but to hear some of those concerns that they had, and these were coming from people who had our best interests in their mind, my family, my parents, my best friends, people who I thought that would be a lot more supportive in our goals to bring Hawaii back to, or bring Hawaiian language back into our home. They had these questions, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Why do you think those things? And I don't know if I thought those things a little bit too. I mean, I definitely, throughout our our time here with Navahi and Punana Leo and Hi'ipepe, I definitely had my doubts. I mean, I went through the whole spectrum of there's no cute ha'avina things for the kids. And then when you go to Target and you want to buy all the school supplies, it's all in ʻŌlelo haole, and there's nothing to support two little girls who want all of this stuff with their school things, and the pencils and the pens and the Hello Kitty, and so that was a lot to go through now. But there's a whole lot of resources now, and there's a whole lot more that our keiki have, and a lot of it is just, if you don't have it, you make it. And if you don't have it, you find people who do. And we're in an incredible hui of ohana, of kumu ohana. Everyone has been so incredible sharing their successes with all of us so that we all can succeed as a group. And that's made the road a lot easier to go down. And I know it's much more difficult back in the 80s when all of those other things were going on. And so I feel fortunate and blessed and excited to be where we are right now. And the girls they love it. It's incredible. It's been incredible for our family. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Maria. Just for clarity for our participants, Maria is a flight attendant with Hawaiian Airlines. And so she agreed, she's on one of her layovers to jump in. So mahalo nui, Maria, for joining us and for sharing that. I just wanted to toss it over to you, Kai, to see if you wanted to add anything onto that, kind of your experience and the decision, that you made for your ohana at that time, and any kind of pushback and how you've addressed that, over the past 8 or 9 years.
Thanks, Amy and Mahalo, for the question, and for both UH Manoa and UH Hilo, and all of their work they've done to help revitalize the Hawaiian language, and all the pioneers and individuals that put in so much time and effort to do that. For me, I am Native Hawaiian, and I grew up in what I would consider a Native Hawaiian household. My dad was pure Native Hawaiian, who was born in the fishing village of Miloli'i down in South Kona, one of Hawaii's last still traditional Native Hawaiian communities. And when I grew up, I'm on the cusp of turning 49. I was born in 1974, and I spent a lot of time in the late 70s and the early 1980s, really the most important years of my life, growing up down in Miloli'i and being exposed to kupuna, our elders who are no longer with us today. And I had an opportunity to hear them speak ʻŌlelo Hawaii, and always wanted to be able to reestablish that in my family when I was able to have a family. My grandmother spoke fluent Hawaiian. My grandfather, who was pure Hawaiian, spoke fluent Hawaiian, but that didn't transfer to my dad, who was born during World War II and really born and grew up in this Western culture. So my dad tried to instill in myself as a little boy how important that was, to learn our language, to learn our culture, to learn our history. And through going to UH Hilo and UH Manoa and taking Hawaiian language years ago at UH Manoa, I came to clearly understand that language is a vital component of culture. It's an extremely important aspect of an individual's identity. And when Maria and I had an opportunity to have children, and they're, right after about that year, 15-month-old point, decided to, how are we going to educate these children? We decided to educate them in Hawaiian immersion. And had never been to a Punana Leo before, didn't even know where it was. We went to it on a Sunday, hung out in the parking lot and looked at the school there, and decided that this is where we wanted our youngest daughter to go to school. And so we've been on this journey now for about 9 years. And it's been an incredible journey that we've been on. I firmly believe in the Kumuhonua Mauli Ola philosophy, or this life force that exists in all of us, especially in Native Hawaiians. And whether it's the pili uhane, the spiritual element, or the lavena, the physical element, the ike ku'una, the traditional knowledge that we get from our ancestors, or most importantly, the ʻŌlelo, or the language component, that is something that I really believe in. And it's something that we try to instill in our children. every day. I believe that life force is found in schools like Navajo Kalani Opu and other educational institutions throughout Hawaii that are working very hard to reestablish our language and also to, develop the next generation of leaders who are going to make big, responsible decisions in our world. And I want them to be grounded in that educational component and that language component that you get through the Kumu Honua Mauli Ola. And so that's one of the reasons why we decided to, go on this journey. At the time, Maria didn't really speak any Hawaiian at all. And so she's really grown in the language as well. We still struggle with it as parents and happy to share some of those struggles and ideas of how we can help traditional households that do not have fluent Hawaiian language speakers in the household. But when you have young children who are growing up in programs and immersion programs like Navahi, on how to help those families grow together so that they can learn the language together.
Oh yeah, mahalo nui and Kai, mahalo for that insight. Just kind of starting there, I think what the goal of starting with that question is once again to reiterate that the barriers and the purported, the injustices that we experience. Sometimes I think, for me anyway, I'll jump specifically to things that happened legally or in political constructs, but the purpose of that discussion is that there are things I think Kawanoi touched on in the initial panel that just have to do with perspective and mindset and residual impacts, if you will, on that level. And so I think one thing that's kind of started in the first panel and still ringing true to this is it's just that sense of and kind of jumping into it and making that decision as a family that this is what we're going to do and this is what we want. And, Maria, to your point, that for Ohana nowadays, we're 40 years in, we've had graduates from 12th grade in the program for, can't do the math that fast in my head, Kehal probably can, 19, 20, 24 years now. The first graduates from high school were back in 1999. And so we have the benefit of that, to speak to, here's evidence, here's actual hua or product of this. And so for some of those that have doubts in the community, it's helpful. But again, the stigmatism still exists. And so to wrap that up, just mahalo nui, Ya'olua, e Kai, me Maria, for taking that jump. Go ahead.
That stigmatism does exist today. And, that is part of the generational and historical trauma, Amy, that we as Native Hawaiians and other indigenous peoples across this world experience, right? It is the European colonization, it's boarding schools, globalization that have, really taken our indigenous languages, and there's about 7,000 of them across the world today, to the brink of extinction. And so I think identifying why revitalizing languages are important is really, really key to then deciding, okay, how are we going to go about the process of, bringing back languages? Why are languages important? Why are they important to identity, to culture, to community? Language is the heart of one's existence. And I think that's something that is really important when looking at preserving a culture and instilling the next generation, with that language.
Absolutely. It's said, I think more and more nowadays that some of the greatest challenges that we face as a global community, as a planet, as the world, some of the answers to those are codified and embedded in indigenous knowledge sets. And the ike, or that knowledge, is unlocked through the languages. And so we're fortunate to be a part of this movement. And I wanted to, I referenced a little bit earlier some of the legal challenges and barriers, and Anela, I'm going to come to you, and I know that you can speak to this probably more than I can. But, in Hawaii, we talked about in the first panel, there's been progress in terms of advocacy and on, a political level, and even legally, Hawaiian is an official language of the state. The immersion program is embedded into the State Department of Education, and that's also based on another constitutional provision and a duty that the state has to provide Hawaiian education. And then most recently, there was a Supreme Court decision that got even more specific. And basically, I might be taking some liberties in how I'm saying this, but saying that there is a duty, there's a constitutional right for ohana, for families throughout Hawaii, to have reasonable access to a Hawaiian immersion education. And so I wanted to just throw that out there as context, and then ask you if you can kind of give us a little bit of insight on your family and what your family's journey through the movement has been, and kind of your own personal experience with the constraints, the resource constraints, as we continue to pursue parity between what ohana and keiki, who are in an English medium, English language, the typical educational system here in Hawaii, versus us in the Hawaiian language program. And again, those resources and just having the ability to have enough room for all of our keiki. If you could just share some insight with us, Anela.
Hikino. So, our journey in ʻŌlelo, Hawaii started probably when I was in high school. My sister's family, they wanted to start raising their keiki maka ʻŌlelo, Hawaii. And so because of that, I was like, okay, I was at Kamehameha at the time. That made me, we had to take a language anyway. And so that's where I started, did 4 years of that. At that point, I realized I wanted to be, at that time, a kumukaya puni. And so when I went to Manoa, Manoa, I took ʻŌlelo Hawaii classes there. And that was the goal, essentially. I did graduate with a bachelor's in ʻŌlelo Hawaii. And I also had the chance to actually teach for a year at Kikula Kaipuni o Pu'ohala. I also realized during that time that, okay, teaching at that time wasn't for me. So then I went the other route and went to law school instead. But for me, so that's the foundation for ʻŌlelo Hawaii in our household. My wife did take some classes when she was in high school as well at Kamehameha. But for the most part, where she picks up her ʻŌlelo Hawaii is from listening to me and learning from myself that way. When we were pregnant with when she was pregnant with our oldest, at that time we already decided, okay, ʻŌlelo Hawaii is going to be the language of the household. And so we actually have 5 keiki, ranging from almost 2 years old all the way up to 10. And so from when, even from before they're born, in utero, they're already listening to us speaking Hawaiian to them already. And so, for us, that is the language of the house. They do hear English everywhere. So the whole thing that people worry about, oh, where are they going to learn English? It's everywhere. So that's never a concern for us. When our oldest, when it came to preschool time, we were on Oahu at the time. And so we enrolled her at Punana Leo o Manoa. A kind of interesting thing from that part for the ʻŌlelo Hawaii Foundation is that she started learning more English from the other keiki there, because at Punana Leo there's keiki coming in that don't have the ʻŌlelo Hawaii background. And so oddly enough, yeah, our daughters, that's where they learned a little bit of English at the time, was when they went to Punana Leo. Yeah, and so we had our oldest there, and then even our second daughter, she went to Punana Leo Manoa. After Punana Leo Manoa, our oldest went to Anuenue, and so she was there from kindergarten till 1st grade. 1st grade was when COVID happened, and so we decided at that time to actually homeschool our keiki. So for 2 years, I had two grade school keiki that I was homeschooling. Plus, I had 2 younger ones that I was doing basically a kula kamali'i with them. And so that's what we did during that time. For the last couple years, we actually have been looking. We wanted to get off of Oahu. We wanted to move to Hilo for many reasons, including that, just the whole institution and having the ability to transition from kamali'i, kula kamali'i, navahi, all the way up through kula nui. Yeah, they have a whole pathway there. In addition to just the whole Hilo lifestyle itself is what we're looking for. And so last year, the opportunity finally presented itself that we were able to make the transition to move to Hilo. And so, we also had to deal with the admissions part for Punana Leo Hilo, and also for Navahi. For Navahi, we have Our son who was going into Papa Mala'o kindergarten. We also had one daughter that would be going into 2nd grade and another that would be going into 4th grade. Our son was able to get in. Unfortunately, there is a lack of capacity at Navahi, and so our 2nd grader and 4th grader, our older two, were waitlisted. And so because of that, I'm actually still homeschooling the two older Kiki at this time as well. And that, you know, that kind of leads to the crux of the question of those constraints. So, you know, I am an attorney, but I'll admit I actually didn't look at the Clara Ball decision, which is the case that Amy is referencing, until last night was the first time I actually sat down, took a look and started reading it. I read, you know, between the opinion, the concurrence, and the dissent. It was really interesting to, you know, to actually be able to finally sit down and focus and read it. And I think the big takeaway from that is, you know, they look at reasonable access as a whole. You know, the court looked at it as the totality of the circumstances. You know, is the institution, is the system providing all the keiki, you know, reasonable access? Whereas even procedurally in the case itself, one of the things that the Clara Ohana was looking for was reasonable access for those specific keiki to be able to access you know, Kaiapuni resources. And, you know, I also started, you know, recently I joined the local governing board for Navahi as well. I also did sit on a governing board for another charter as well. And you know, one of the things I was able to recognize is this isn't just for one school's issue. This is more of a systemic problem. And even when my oldest daughter was at Anuenue, you know, that's a K through 12 school. They still don't have a gym after all these years. You know, if we're looking for parity on that level, that's a prime example of where that's not happening. Is that you have a school that's not just a, you know, it's not a charter. It's actually a regular Department of Education public school, which doesn't have the resources to be able to even have a gym on its campus. And so looking at that, I understand the challenge. I probably, if I didn't know all the background, if I didn't have the legal knowledge for it as well, I probably would be ready to go and file something to try and get my keiki in as well. But you know, there is that barrier in terms of what constitutes reasonable access. You know, there's between you know, when we go into the application process for admissions, you know, they tell us at the meetings that there's a wait list, and you hear about that, and also seeing that, you know, there's only so much space that that we can have keiki at, and so in terms of providing reasonable access, yes, the school itself is providing what they can with what they have, but I think that the Department of Education and the state needs to do a better job of providing resources for the schools to be able to provide it as broadly as possible. And I also understand that there's even a problem with doing that as well, is having the kumu who can do that, you know, and so there's a big problem with there, which, you know, in the end, that for us as our ohana, that meant, okay, you know, I'm gonna homeschool them. You know, that left us with basically a couple options. You're either going to do what we're doing and homeschooling, which also comes at the expense of just, you know, earnings potential on our end, because that leaves less opportunity for myself to do that. Like, you know, like Maria had mentioned, you know, if you don't have it, you make it. That's part of what I have to do at times, is, you know, when I don't have the ha'awina, the homework and lessons in place, you come up with resources. Right. I didn't look into it as much, but I think there was a virtual option, but I didn't want my kids to be sitting in front of a screen all day as well. Or what's the other option? You send them to a regular English-speaking public school, which wasn't an option for our household. And so that left us where we're at today.
Well, Anna, for sharing all that. And I think it's, you know, your experience is insightful, and it's another testament to the level of commitment, you know, that it takes from Ohana. And I think we've been fortunate as a movement to have families who are drawn to the program, who understand and embrace and kind of live out that commitment. Because, and for Ohana that have the ability to do so. And I just also wanted to contextualize for our participants, when ʻŌlelo was kind of telling his story and giving his background, he was talking about moving and wanting to leave Oahu and leave Honolulu. I'm sure a lot of people know this, but just to make sure, Honolulu is kind of like the metropolitan city of Hawaii. And so, you know, for our Ohana wanting to move out to other islands and have a different kind of experience and environment for their Ohana, you know, ʻŌlelo was sharing that. And, you know, I think another the experience at Nawahi, and I'm going to roll into Kehao because I know she's intimately familiar with this, is, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know the exact numbers, but if Nawahi isn't the largest, it's probably the second largest K-12 site in the state. And the reason I bring that up is that even though Nawahi is now serving multiple hundreds of children, and Kehao, I'll ask you to confirm that exact number once I pose the question to you, there is still a shortage, there's still a need. We have more Ohana than we have seats. You know, the space and facilities are a challenge. And then, as ʻŌlelo brought up, teachers, just having enough teachers. And so even though I think many times people look at what's going on in Hawaii and there's been a lot of progress, there are still continued challenges that we overcome, but we keep moving through those. And so Kehao, I wanted to jump to you. If you could speak to that, but specifically, I think some of the challenges that you experience within a school, and as a program develops, one of the beauties of having the ability to develop educational approaches, indigenous educational approaches, is that sometimes you discover some really cool, innovative things that haven't already been done in an English-speaking educational environment. And so there's this sense of, wow, this is amazing, we're going to implement that. But then you run into barriers because it isn't status quo, it isn't the norm. And even though the outcomes are positive and successful, you kind of run into that kind of barrier institutionally. And so just wondering if you could kind of speak to that and what the strategy at Nawahi has been to overcome those kinds of barriers, internal barriers.
Right, aloha kako. So to put in context, the numbers wise, in terms of our campus, so we have just under 500 on our campus, which is the biggest K through 12 Hawaiian medium education program in that sense. And then we have 2 satellite sites, which encompasses another 100, so about 600 total students, which is definitely the joys of the progress of the program over the last 25 years. We have our 25th graduating class this year as well. So, you know, how our program has developed. But yes, definitely a little bit about my background. I became a kumu before I became a parent in the program. So I was a kumu since 2001, and then I became a parent a few years after that. My son was in the initial Hi'ipepe program when you would send your child at 6 weeks, and I was one of those that signed up. Yep, got to get back to work. We got to get back to being a kumu. So yes, you know, we were looking for people to kind of be in that first cohort, and we all signed up. There was a lot of our kumu at that time teachers who signed up for that program. And 12 years later, I had a daughter, and she was part of the Hi'ipepe program currently. But speaking to this idea of the innovations or the progress that we made, and there's still the obstacles, I think one commonality, and I think a lot of indigenous communities and language communities, is this idea of how do you assess in terms of assessment and evaluation for our keiki. And, you know, we say that we have those resources. Our kupuna, you know, knew how to know, they knew, yeah, when you were part of that ike, when that ike was established, or when you could display that. And we have been innovative in coming up with our own culturally based measures of ensuring the progress of our keiki in, you know, in math and in reading, writing, even language proficiency and acquisition. However, it doesn't fit the mold of the Western idea of one test that fits all. And so it is that barrier, or that residual type of colonized mindset that says that all keiki at 4th grade need to take this one test across the United States, and that's how we measure. And that does nothing, or really becomes an obstacle for language communities, indigenous language communities, who are trying to revive their language and assess and evaluate the progress of their haumana, their students within that language. As we all know, you can't take an English test and translate it in Hawaiian because it doesn't have the cultural aspect of it, and it doesn't really go to evaluate. And you know how Kai had said too about these ideas, you know, that test isn't going to evaluate lavena, right? That test isn't going to evaluate the traditional knowledge that your child has learned. And so unfortunately, I think those are still aspects that we continue to work on. Most recent legislation as well, you know, as parents. And I think, you know, when we receive that call to action, we really, you know, take that upon us and carry that as well, because it really becomes about our voices being heard, not just for myself as a kumu, but for myself as a parent, you know, and saying that, no, I don't want my child to be tested in English. You know, I want my child to be tested in their language of instruction, which is Hawaiian. And I want it to be assessment that has been evaluated and really proven to be authentic and appropriate as well. And if, you know, if I'm okay with having that being done at the school level, then that should be okay, right? As a parent. And I, you know, and I support that. And so I think we still work as parents, especially I feel like every legislative session, we still work, yeah, to make sure that our voices are heard in that realm as well. And, you know, constantly trying to educate those around us as well. I mean, I'm a kumu. I'm also, you know, a wife and a auntie. And so I've been fortunate that my family has been very supportive. My keiki are the only two in our ohana that only speak Hawaiian, with, you know, multitude of cousins who don't. But, you know, I've always been supported in that aspect, but we know that that's not always the case. I think when we all spoke to it about, you know, coming across, my son's going to graduate, and the first thing is like, well, is he going to be okay in college, you know, in an English language? He'll be fine. You know, no concerns at all, because I know the values and, you know, what he has learned at Nawahi surpasses just the English language acquisition. And I know it's those foundational values that he's learned that'll help him exceed, you know, wherever that is, whether it's in a Hawaiian language setting, whether it's in English, whether he goes off and it's in Spanish language. I mean, whatever that is, you know, I know he'll be fine and he'll succeed, because, you know, we say, because, you know, he Nawahi Oya. He's a product of Nawahi. And so, yeah, I think it is that constant call for us as parents. I know we all are, as parents, are definitely supportive of our kumu. We definitely work alongside our kumu, right, to instill this type of education with our keiki. And I think that just becomes, that's the norm, right, in this type of Hawaiian medium education. You can't just drop your keiki off, right? I mean, I know for some of us, we help. I know some of us are helping, and even in the volleyball program, you know, I mean, those small things, but that's really important, right? So for our keiki to see that the language is living outside of the, you know, the classroom setting, and it's living within our families, and those of us who are just learning, who have, you know, who have learned or who have been in it for 20 plus years, but we're all working together because we see the uniqueness, the benefits, ways surpass, right, the struggles, but we're going to constantly push those struggles and push those boundaries, and, you know, try to educate those who may be skeptical still, so that they can become supporters, yeah, of our movement as well.
Mahalo nui ke hao for sharing some of that insight, you know, and just speaking to the fact that even if it is things that have to do that are curriculum related, that parents continually have a place, not only a place and an opportunity, but a kuleana to engage in that and help along with school leadership to ensure that those things that are best for their children as it relates to this Hawaiian language, Hawaiian culture, educational experience are supported and actually come to fruition. So mahalo nui for sharing that. I'm going to circle back around to Kai, probably with our last question, but I'm going to ask all four of you. There was a question from the audience, and you folks can respond in the chat, perhaps. There was a question as to how much, I'm going to rephrase it, but it's basically, how much Hawaiian do you think your child speaks in a day? So for the hours that they happen to be at Nawahi, I'm assuming, okay, or well, yeah, all of your keiki are not at Nawahi, that's like 8 hours a day. So maybe it has to do with the rest of the day. So I don't know if you can drop in a percentage, if you will, just an estimate of how many, in a 24-hour period, either the percent of those hours and the number of hours that you think your keiki spends speaking ʻŌlelo Hawaii, and I would assume it's versus ʻŌlelo Pelekania or English. And again, I already stated, from the beginning that our ohana come from various backgrounds, and some do have the ability to speak Hawaiian at home, and some don't, and that's fine, and that's just the reality. And I think the affirmation of that to our audience is a source of hope, to know that it's a spectrum of ohana that make this program work. So yeah, if you guys could drop that into the chat instead of the chat, or put it in the answer to the Q&A box. I'm going to address one of a really quick question that came up, which is the educational system being bilingual. And for the person who posed that question, we can get into that, in a subsequent panel. We're going to have one of our linguists with us, but, and Kehao, you can correct me, but English is not introduced as a course at Nawahi, and potentially in the other immersion schools throughout the state until 5th grade, correct, Kehao? And so everything else, everything else that is taught at Nawahi is taught through Hawaiian and through the medium of Hawaiian. So Nawahi as a campus, as a particular site, is not, I don't know if that qualifies as a bilingual program, and I'm sorry, that's beyond my capacity as a linguist to know what the definition their definition is. But there was a question about the program being bilingual since 2015. So I'm not sure what that's specific to, but I do know that at Nawahi, it's not introduced. And it is introduced as a course. It's not like from 5th grade on, classes are taught in English. English is a course that is taught through Hawaiian at Nawahi, and so that's the introduction of English there. And so Kai, I wanted to come back to you, and if you folks can drop your answers to the question about the percentage or the number of hours that your keiki ʻŌlelo Hawaii throughout the day, I'd appreciate that. To wrap it up, just wanted to come back to you, Kai, because we're talking about the parent experience, the makua experience, and a lot of overcoming injustices is just being engaged and being committed. But a lot of times it is about engaging civically, and in the political process. And just wanted to ask you to share any thoughts, any advice or insight that you might have for parents in embracing that, and or even leadership in the program in terms of some of those things that still need to happen, whether that's on a local or a national level.
Well, I think, thanks for the question. Something Anela had talked about earlier, I think is a great example to answer your question, because that Clara ball case on Lanai of reasonable access for those that makua and their keiki to enroll their kids in Kulakaiopuni on Lanai is a good example of why individuals need to be involved politically and civically, right? It should have never come to that decision. That was a decision made at the Department of Education, and individuals there that do not share the same mindset that we have over not just language revitalization, but the application of the law and Hawaii State Constitution. It would take a linguist professor from UH Manoa to explain to the Supreme Court that and the DOE that reasonable access is not the gold standard, or immersion is not the gold standard. That's a minimum standard for education for students in ʻŌlelo Hawaii. And so, it's really important to for families, for parents, for makua to be civically engaged and politically engaged, because we wouldn't have the programs at UH Manoa, at UH Hilo. We wouldn't have Navahi. We wouldn't have Halikomo. Many of these programs are embedded in state law. There are many indigenous laws embedded in federal law. A great example, and I had a chance to be a part of and help shape the Native American Language Resource Center Act of 2022 that was signed into law by President Biden just last year, which will establish Native language resources across the country. But at the end of the day, it comes down to funding. It comes down to funding. It comes down to policy, state legislatures, and at the end of the day, that power resides in the people, right? We elect these representatives that represent us in our city councils, in our state legislatures, in the highest offices in our state, federal, and county governments. And if we don't elect people, if we don't take the time to educate ourselves on these individuals that are representing us in government, then it challenges the advancement of language revitalization and our movements that we're trying to work on. It comes down to funding, right? And so funding, policy, advocacy is really, really important. And
shucks, we lost him right at the end of his sentence. Thank you, though, for that, Kaya, for sharing that insight and the importance, the example that you brought up with the Clara Ohana is a great example. That Supreme Court decision affirming the right to access a Hawaiian immersion education in the state of Hawaii wouldn't have happened without the family coming forth. And so thank you again for bringing that up. And we've run again, we're at the end of our time together. And so I just want to wrap up by thanking all of you for joining us, for taking the time out and being willing to share your personal experience. And for our audience members, I hope that the mana'o shared, the thoughts shared, and the insight is something that you benefits you and the work that you do and or the journey that you're on. So mahalo ho ya oko e ha no ke yahui ana lawi kai. Aloha.
Mahalo nui. Aloha.
Yeah. And for our participants, we're going to take another really quick break. We'll put up a plate and we'll be back hopefully in the next couple of minutes. We're just going to promote our panelists for the third panel into the webinar here, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Aloha.